Welcome to Cine Pro, where we bring your favorite movies back to life with quick recaps, hidden details, and everything you missed. Our film begins in a high school in America with Eddie, the nerdy guy who doesn't fit in and is on his way to detention. As he enters, he sees Jeanette, the girl he has a crush on from afar. But the problem is she's standing next to Brad, the tough coach of the team who always mocks Eddie. Eddie tries to muster the courage to talk to Jeanette, but Brad tells him to wake up. Nerd grabs his glasses and breaks them. Eddie, unable to see, is forced to go sit in the back of the class, but he pulls out his magical kit from his bag and fixes his glasses as if they were new. At the same time, the guy who's always on a skateboard and has small business schemes to make some cash was on his way to detention, making a small deal with Jenny, who seemed to be waiting for her order. Then Willow, Eddie's only friend who's obsessed with zombie movies, enters. And if you mention the word zombie, she'll talk until the person in front of her zones out. As for Mark, the guy who entered detention with a grim face and eyes like someone who woke up at dawn, he didn't seem okay at all. Ash decided to talk to him, not to ask about his health, but to see if he could sell him something to perk him up. At that moment, the teacher responsible for detention entered, her face stern as if she earned commission for every student detained. Eddie quickly ran to her to ask if this detention would go on his record and ruin his chances of getting into Harvard. Meanwhile, Ash noticed that Mark was injured and rushed to him to ask what happened. Mark said he had been bitten by a strange man on the street, and when he showed the wound, his hand seemed to be decaying and growing in size in a strange way. Suddenly, Mark started convulsing in front of everyone, and within seconds, his face turned pale, and his mouth was covered in a blue substance. Willow ran to help him, but before anyone could do anything, Mark attacked her and bit her neck. All the students rushed to pull him away, but Mark wouldn't let go. They had to use all their strength to throw him against the wall. His head hit the wall hard, and he fell unconscious. But Willow was severely injured, and the wound on her neck was bleeding heavily. Willow quickly thought of something to stop the bleeding, tearing a piece of Jeanette's clothing despite her objections and wrapping it around the wound. Meanwhile, Brad ran out to get help, but as soon as he opened the door, he found himself in a real nightmare. Just like what happened to Mark, there were other students in the hallway, but they weren't normal. They were attacking each other, biting, and one of them was being eaten alive while still conscious. Brad stood in shock, unable to comprehend what was happening. Inside, Eddie and Willow began to realize that the zombie movies they loved had become a reality, and blood was everywhere. Eddie suggested they lock the door and hide inside, but before they could even think about executing the plan, Mark, whom they thought was dead, suddenly moved, adjusted his broken neck, and began advancing toward them with eyes full of a strange hunger. That night, the students decided to stick together and navigate the school's hallways and corridors, surrounded by the hungry undead trying to get anyone who came close. The group moved cautiously until they reached the principal's office. The first thing they did was try to contact anyone for help, but the network was down, and no one was reachable. At that moment, Eddie thought of checking if the principal was in his office, but as soon as he entered the room, he froze in horror. The principal's body was dismembered and hanging from the ceiling fan. The scene was gruesome, and any hope that he might still be alive vanished completely. Brad gathered the group and said the only solution was to find a place to hide, somewhere relatively safe. Willow suggested going to the library because almost no one in the school goes there, and the bookshelves could be used as barriers to block the entrance. Everyone agreed with the idea and began to cautiously leave the office one by one. But before they reached the library door, they encountered another disaster waiting for them. 2 zombies eating the fresh corpse of a student. The scene was terrifying, but Eddie's analytical mind told him that these creatures only focused on what was directly in front of them, and if they stayed calm and didn't move quickly, they might pass by unnoticed. Brad agreed. Eddie was terrified but had no choice but to comply. He took a deep breath and began walking slowly past the zombies who were busy with their meal. Luckily, he passed without anyone noticing him, but Ash, as usual, had to ruin everything. He shouted excitedly, "Bravo, Eddie!" The zombies in the hallway immediately turned toward the group, surrounding them from all directions. In a bold and unexpected move, Eddie grabbed a metal locker tightly. The plan worked, and the zombies focused on him, allowing the others to quickly enter the library and close the door behind them. Eddie, who suddenly found unexpected courage, took advantage of the opportunity. He jumped under the zombies, crossed to the other side safely, and entered the library with the others before anyone could touch him. Now, after they closed the library door and piled everything they could in front of it to block the entrance, they had another problem. Willow's condition was worsening, and the infection seemed to be spreading rapidly. She was sitting next to them, struggling, blood dripping from her neck, trying to talk to Eddie to find a solution, but it was clear her body couldn't take it anymore. Suddenly, her heart stopped beating. Jeanette quickly ran to her and tried chest compressions to revive her, but there was no response. Her mouth began to be covered with the same slimy substance that Mark had before he turned. Jeanette, with her sharp mind, decided to give her mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, not realizing that the person in front of her had already turned into a zombie, waiting for the right moment to attack her. At the last moment, Eddie noticed what was happening and understood the situation. He rushed at full speed, pushed Jeanette away before she got too close, and she fell to the ground, stunned by what had happened. But instead of thanking Eddie, she looked at Brad, thinking he was the one who saved her. She quickly hugged him while Eddie stood there feeling both shocked and heartbroken. There was no time for drama now because they had a raging zombie to deal with. Everyone gathered around the table, facing Mrs. Ramirez, who had now become a monstrous creature hungry for human flesh. Brad, feeling pain in his hand, looked at it and saw it was slightly swollen. Eddie asked him anxiously, "Did you get bitten?" Brad, struggling to hold himself together, replied, "No, but I think I jammed my finger." They knew they had to destroy her brain. With determination, they said confidently, "There's no way we're getting out of here alive unless we fight back." Those who tried to move were either finished or became victims. They needed to find something to help them, so they decided to split up and search for anything useful. Everyone started looking around the library, but the problem was they mostly books, which unfortunately aren't effective weapons against zombies that devour humans. While Jimmy was flipping through a book, the unexpected happened. The zombie librarian was waiting behind the shelves. Suddenly, she attacked him, biting his neck. His scream brought everyone running to him, and Jerry pulled him aside. They tried to fend off the zombie, but there were no suitable weapons around except for the books. They started throwing everything they could get their hands on. Brad, who was furious about what happened to his friend, noticed a flag attached to a pole. He grabbed it, broke it in half, and struck the zombie in the head with all his strength until he finished it off. Jimmy was lying on the ground, bleeding, knowing he had only seconds before he turned into one of them. Everyone stood in shock, unsure of what to do, but Jimmy, still conscious, weakly said, "I won't wait for this to happen." He threw himself out of the library window, where the zombies in the yard attacked and devoured him in front of his friends. Everyone stood in disbelief at what had just happened, except for Eddie, who understood the rules of horror movies better than anyone else. He knew this was the best ending Jimmy could have had. After the shock, the group decided to calm down and hide again. Eddie glanced at his arm, where the infection was spreading, but he kept it hidden under his jacket. Meanwhile, Janet was overwhelmed with pressure, becoming anxious and breaking down, unable to cope with the situation. Ash, who knew how to calm people in his own way, said, "It's on me tonight," and started handing out free goods to help the group relax. Everyone took their share except for Eddie, who refused and said seriously, "In horror movies, the ones who take these things are the first to go." But of course, no one listened to him and tried to distract themselves from the nightmare they were in. At first, Eddie refused to take anything Ash distributed, but eventually he told himself, "What's the harm tonight?" and tried it. He didn't like the result at all, but the others were thrilled that Eddie finally stepped out of his comfort zone and became part of the group's vibe. While everyone was relaxing and enjoying the moment, Eddie decided to speak honestly for the first time about why he ended up in detention. He said, "I had something illegal in my bag." Everyone looked at him in shock, even Ash, who said, "Are you really Eddie, or is this a prank?" Eddie continued, "I only took it so I could study and get into Harvard, but when they caught me and threw me in detention, my whole future was ruined. And not just that, I had a gun in my bag." The room fell silent, and everyone stared at Eddie as if he were a completely different person. Even Eddie didn't know why he confessed, but he felt it was necessary to be honest. Willow suddenly raised her hand and silenced everyone. She whispered, "There's someone outside." Everyone froze in place and began listening intently. Loud banging sounds were coming from the other side of the wall. Someone, or something, was trying to break through the door and get to them. They exchanged terrified looks, wondering who or what was waiting for them outside. As the banging grew louder, the wall suddenly cracked, and a giant zombie hand emerged from the hole. Janet screamed at the top of her lungs and tried to back away, but the creature grabbed her. Eddie, now a self-proclaimed expert in saving Janet, attacked once again. He grabbed the first book he could find and hurled it with all his might at the zombie's head. The creature was forced to let go of Janet and fell to the ground. This time, Janet realized who had saved her. She ran to Eddie, hugged him tightly, and said, "Thank you, hero." Eddie was overjoyed until the magical moment was completely ruined when the hand that had emerged from the wall returned and grabbed Eddie. The pain was indescribable as Eddie was pulled toward the wall, screaming for someone to save him. Everyone rushed to help, but the zombie's hand was gripping him tightly and wouldn't let go. At that moment, Janet and Willow decided to save him the same way he saved her. They saw the library's book cart and pushed it with all their strength toward the wall, severing the zombie's hand completely. Unfortunately, even after being detached from the body, the hand remained latched onto Eddie and refused to let go. Ash ran to Eddie and, with the help of the others, managed to pry the hand off him. Eddie collapsed to the ground, unable to believe he had survived. After the horrifying ordeal, the group decided to stay inside the library. But Eddie began to notice something strange. Looking through a crack in the door, he saw the number of zombies increasing significantly as time passed. The creatures were gathering more and more at the door. If the situation continued, the barricade they had made with books wouldn't hold for more than a few seconds before breaking. To distract himself from the impending disaster, Eddie started talking about how beautiful Janet was. Willow, who was sitting next to him and observing his behavior, asked, "What do you even see in her?" At first, Eddie was flustered, but Willow kept pressing him until he admitted the truth he had been denying. He didn't really love Janet. He just wanted to be with a beautiful and popular girl to feel important like everyone else. Willow looked at him and said seriously, "You don't need anyone to make you special. You're already special. You just don't see it." Her words touched Eddie in a way he never expected. For the first time, he looked at Willow differently, the girl who had always been there for him, who understood him better than anyone else, and who had literally risked her life to save him. He smiled at her and said, "If we get out of this night alive, I want to take you on a date." The sweet moment was abruptly interrupted when Ash suddenly said, "Guys, I need to use the bathroom." Willow, who had been watching the situation from the window, said, "Honestly, he's right. The zombies are increasing. If we stay here waiting, we're doomed." The big problem was that the main door was completely blocked, meaning they needed to find another way out. Willow pointed to a vent in the middle of the library and said, "Look, there's an opening here. I think we can all fit through and escape this place." Everyone looked at each other, and the idea made sense, especially as the zombies continued to gather at the library door. Everyone agreed, except for Janet, who refused to go out among the monsters no matter what. Brad tried to convince her, saying, "We're not leaving without you. We'll get out together, or we'll all turn." Everyone started moving, but the surprise was that Eddie refused to move towards the vent opening while Willow was saying, "Hurry up before anyone notices." Everyone started moving, but the surprise was that Eddie refused to move. Willow stood in her place, stunned, and said to him, "What are you doing? You have to come with us." Eddie looked at Janet, then at Willow, and said, "I'll stay here." Those words shocked Willow, but she knew there was no time to waste. She decided to leave him and move on, as time in the library was running out. Only Eddie and Janet were left, and the atmosphere became stranger than before. Janet, who Eddie always saw as just a nerd, began to get closer to him as they sat at the table amidst the chaos. At that moment, Eddie asked her a question that had been on his mind for years. "Why have you never gone out with someone like me?" Janet chuckled lightly and said, "Honestly, people like leaders can't go out with players or comedians. Like you, impossible." Eddie shocked by her words. Only then did he realize that Willow had been right all along. He and Janet had nothing in common except his illusion that she was the right person for him. Meanwhile, Willow, Ash, and Brad were crawling through the vent, using a lighter to see in the dark. Suddenly, Willow heard a strange sound coming from the pipes. She held the lighter closer, and suddenly a nightmare appeared before her. A massive, decayed zombie with sharp teeth and black eyes like death. She screamed, "Go back!" But before anyone could retreat, the entire vent system collapsed, and they fell into the middle of the corridor. Fortunately, there were no zombies nearby, but the disaster was that Ash fell hard. When he stood up, he made a shocking discovery. His bag, his only source of income, was still up in the pipes. "No!" Ash screamed, looking up. He then said to Brad, "I have to get it. It's the most valuable thing in my life." Brad, who was trying to secure the area, said, "We've got bigger problems." But Ash wasn't listening. He climbed onto Brad's shoulders and tried to reach the pipes to grab his bag. Unfortunately, next to it, the zombie rat. In an instant, the creature leaped onto Ash and began tearing him apart. The screams were deafening and blood poured onto the floor. Within seconds, there was nothing left of him but his legs, which fell from the vent opening. The problem was that this scene caught the attention of the zombies, and they all began gathering around Willow and Brad, surrounding them from every direction. Brad looked at Willow and said, "We don't have a weapon." Willow looked around and found herself standing next to Ash's freshly severed legs. She looked at Brad, and after a moment of silence said, "We have one now." Swing, they grabbed Ash's legs and began using them to fight off the attacking zombies smashing their way through the chaos. The battle wasn't over, and the night was still long. Eddie was still stunned by Janet's words, realizing she might be starting to see him differently. It was clear she understood the world was ending and decided to create a romantic moment, as if it were a scene from a romantic movie amidst the chaos. She leaned toward him and said, "Look, I don't know if we'll survive, but at least let's make this moment worthwhile." Eddie stood there, unable to believe he was living the moment he had dreamed of his entire life. But before anything could happen, a loud noise interrupted everything. The library door was being banged on furiously. Willow and Brad were outside, trying to get in before the zombies caught them. Without thinking, Eddie and Janet ran to the door. Despite the danger of opening it, they quickly removed the barricade, letting Willow and Brad in at the last moment. But the zombies now knew their location and were gathering at the door, trying to break in with all their strength. They had only seconds before the zombies would enter. Eddie was trying to think of a solution, but Janet, still wanting a romantic moment amidst the chaos, grabbed his hand and pulled him into the adjacent room. He resisted, saying, "Are you kidding me? We're in the middle of a disaster." Meanwhile, Willow was left alone with Brad. But at that moment, she discovered the real catastrophe. Brad's infection had spread to his nervous system, meaning he was starting to transform. As soon as the convulsions hit his body and his eyes began to change, he grabbed the barricade they had placed on the door and started dismantling it as if preparing the zombies to come in. Willow quickly ran to the other room, opened the door, and said, "Sorry to ruin your romantic scene, but we've got a crisis in the library. Brad is transforming, and the zombies are about to get in." Eddie and Janet ran with her quickly, but they were too late. Brad was standing in front of them, but it wasn't the Brad they knew. He had officially turned into a zombie and was slowly moving toward them. Willow and Eddie didn't hesitate for a moment and ran to shut the door to prevent the zombies from entering, leaving Janet alone in front of her now transformed former lover. Janet stood frozen in fear. Eddie and Willow stood behind the door, hearing Janet's screams as she tried to deal with zombie Brad. But Eddie looked at Willow and said, "We need to give her a reason to gather her strength." Willow smiled and yelled, "Brad was cheating on you." Janet, while still dodging Brad's attacks, paused for a moment and looked at him, her expression changing completely. Suddenly, she transformed from a terrified girl to an enraged one, her eyes blazing with fire. "You liar! You scumbag!" She screamed at the top of her lungs and grabbed the leg of a chair, beating him mercilessly. But unfortunately, zombies don't feel pain, and Brad kept moving. Suddenly, Janet looked around quickly and found a large wooden plank nearby. She picked it up and drove it into his chest with all her strength. Brad staggered backward, but Janet didn't stop. She looked at the window behind him and pushed him with all her might. He fell out of the window and into the arms of the waiting zombies below. Janet, breathing heavily, wiped the sweat from her forehead and said, "Let's close this door." But even after they barricaded it, the barrier wouldn't hold for long. Eddie knew they had to move immediately. At that moment, his eyes fell on Ash's skateboard, the broken chairs, and the still moving zombie limbs. Willow looked at him and said, "Eddie, what are you thinking?" Eddie grabbed the handle and said, "Ready?" Janet replied, "No, but we're not going to sit around waiting for death." Eddie accelerated the vehicle at full speed, crashing through a horde of zombies. Eddie pulled out the gun he had hidden for this moment and started shooting zombies without hesitation. Bullets flew in every direction, each shot taking down a monster. At the same time, Willow grabbed the flag from the library, wielding its pole like a spear, striking the heads of the approaching monsters. The plan was working, and their improvised vehicle moved through the chaos. But as they neared the stairs, the vehicle flipped, sending all three of them flying through the air and tumbling down the stairs like bowling pins. Before anyone could process what had happened, the real disaster appeared. Amy and Brad had returned to life as zombies, ready to attack. Willow was the first to act, striking Ash in the head with the flagpole, knocking him to the ground, motionless. Then she pulled a knife from her boot and, without hesitation, stabbed Jimmy in the head, finishing him off. Only Brad remained, attacking Janet with ferocity. Eddie was still trying to get up from the ground, but Willow rushed over, pulling out the wooden stake embedded in Brad's chest, and struck him in the head with all her strength. The monster collapsed to the ground, unconscious. Finally, the three managed to escape, but the school was overrun with zombies, and the bullets in the gun were nearly gone. Their only option was to run toward the gym and escape to the school's rooftop. The three of them ran through the monsters, dodging attacks miraculously, and reached the gym doors. But the disaster struck. The door was locked. Willow quickly ran to unlock it, but Eddie saw something worse. The zombies were too many, and there wasn't enough time for everyone to enter safely. Eddie made a decisive choice. He handed the gun to Willow, looked at her seriously, and said, "Leave me and run. I understand now. I want to be with Amy." Willow looked at him in shock, then gave a small smile and said, "All right, but don't be late. You still owe me." Eddie smiled, picked up a baseball bat from the ground, and began fighting the zombies with all his might. Each one that approached him received a blow to the head, knocking them out of the game. But the problem was, there were too many zombies, and the bat slipped from his hands during the fight. His eyes landed on a pair of scissors lying on the stairs. Without thinking, he grabbed them and started using them as weapons, stabbing the zombies in the head. Finally, he faced a zombie holding a clarinet as if it were a weapon of death. But Eddie, with all his finesse, took the musical instrument from the zombie and struck its head with it, finishing it off in seconds. After leaving behind a field full of fallen zombies, he heard a scream coming from the gym. Willow and Janet were running at full speed toward the stairs leading to the roof, with the monsters relentlessly chasing them. They began climbing quickly, but disaster struck. A zombie cheerleader appeared from below, grabbing Janet's leg and biting her. Janet screamed in pain and nearly fell, but Willow quickly raised the gun and shot the zombie directly in the head, killing it instantly. They continued climbing and reached the roof, but they knew the harsh truth. Janet wouldn't survive. The infection had entered her body, and it was only a matter of time. Janet looked at Willow with fear in her eyes and said, "I don't want to turn. You have to end it before it happens." Willow hesitated, but there was no choice. There was only one bullet left in the gun. With trembling hands, she raised the gun, aiming it at Janet, tears streaming down her face. But before she could pull the trigger, Eddie suddenly appeared, climbing up the stairs and reaching the roof. Before anyone could celebrate his return, the zombie horde was chasing him, running at full speed. Without hesitation, Willow used the last bullet in the gun, shooting the lead zombie directly in the head, killing it instantly. But the nightmare wasn't over. Zombie Brad was still there, charging at them with incredible speed, and they had no weapons left. Eddie and Willow braced themselves for their fate.